When my own son abandoned me in a nursing home and flew to another continent with my money, he thought I was just another helpless old woman who would quietly fade away. He was dead wrong. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The ceiling above me wasn't mine. That was the first thought that pierced through the fog of sleep as consciousness slowly returned to me. This wasn't the familiar cream-colored plaster with its small crack near the corner that I'd stared at for countless mornings in my bedroom on Maple Ridge Drive. This ceiling was stark white, unmarked, sterile, like a hospital room. I blinked several times, hoping the foreign surroundings would somehow transform back into my cozy bedroom in Willowbrook. But the illusion shattered as my eyes adjusted to the harsh fluorescent lighting filtering through unfamiliar curtains. The smell hit me next, that distinctive combination of disinfectant, institutional food, and something else I couldn't quite place. It was the smell of a place where people came to wait. My name is Catherine Hartwell, and I'm 71 years old. For 7 decades, I had woken up in beds that belonged to me, in homes that were mine. First in my childhood bedroom, in my parents' modest house on Elderberry Street, where morning light would dance through the lace curtains my mother had sewn by hand. Then for 43 beautiful years in the house that my late husband Thomas and I had built together on Maple Ridge Drive, a charming 2-story colonial with forest green shutters and a wraparound porch where we'd spent countless evenings watching our children play in the yard. But this morning, God, what morning was it? I found myself staring at a ceiling that belonged to someone else, in a room that felt more like a hotel suite than a home. Except hotels don't have call buttons mounted next to the bed, and hotels don't have that particular institutional smell that seemed to seep into your skin. I turned my head slowly, taking in the rest of my surroundings. A single bed with utilitarian white linens. A small dresser made of light wood that looked like it had been mass-produced. A tiny kitchenette with a microwave and mini refrigerator. A bathroom door slightly ajar, revealing grab bars mounted on the walls. Everything was clean, functional, and completely devoid of personality. Where were my things? Where was the antique jewelry box Thomas had given me for our 10th anniversary? Where was the family photo from our last Christmas together, all of us gathered around the tree in the living room? Where was the small oil painting of the lighthouse that had hung above my dresser for 20 years? Panic began to rise in my chest like ice water. I sat up too quickly, and the room spun slightly. That's when I noticed the 2 suitcases against the far wall. My suitcases, the navy blue set that Thomas and I had bought for our trip to Europe 15 years ago. But I hadn't packed those suitcases. I hadn't planned any trip. The memories came flooding back in pieces, like a jigsaw puzzle reassembling itself in my mind. The concerned phone calls from my son Derek and his wife Amber about my safety. The gradual increase in their visits, each one highlighting some new problem they'd discovered. The fall in my bathroom 6 months ago that had given them the ammunition they needed. The legal papers I'd signed, trusting my own flesh and blood to have my best interests at heart. And then the tour. Oh, that carefully orchestrated tour of Sunset Manor, this wonderful senior community that Derek had insisted we visit, just to see what options were available. I remembered Amber's bright smile as she'd gushed about the amenities. I remembered Derek's reassuring words about how this was just temporary, while they figured out the best long-term solution. But most clearly, I remembered the moment of realization when the coordinator had said, "Here's your room, Mrs. Hartwell," and I'd understood that this wasn't a tour at all. This was a fait accompli. My son and daughter-in-law had already decided my fate, had already paid for my imprisonment in this place, and were presenting it to me as a done deal. The rage that had been simmering beneath my shock began to bubble to the surface. Derek had manipulated me, lied to me, and essentially kidnapped me under the guise of caring for my welfare. And Amber, sweet, supposedly devoted Amber, had been his willing accomplice, probably even the mastermind behind the whole scheme. I swung my legs over the side of the bed and stood up, testing my balance. Despite what my son apparently believed, I was perfectly capable of taking care of myself. Yes, I'd had that accident in the bathroom, but it was a simple slip on a wet floor, something that could happen to anyone at any age. I wasn't some doddering old fool who needed to be warehoused away from society. The worst part wasn't even that they'd tricked me into this place. The worst part was the conversation I'd overheard yesterday while they thought I was sleeping. Derek's voice, low but not quite low enough. "The house should sell quickly in this market. The real estate agent thinks we can get at least $800,000 for it." Amber's response had cut through me like a knife. "And with Mom's accounts consolidated under the power of attorney, we can finally take that trip to New Zealand. I've been dreaming about it for years." They weren't just putting me away for my own good. They were cashing in on my misfortune, selling my home, the home where I'd raised my children, where Thomas and I had built our life together, and using the proceeds to fund their dreams. All while telling themselves, and anyone who would listen, that they were being responsible, caring children. But Derek had made one critical mistake. He'd underestimated his mother. As I stood in that sterile room, looking out the window at the manicured grounds of Sunset Manor, I made a promise to myself. I would not go quietly into this good night. I would not be another forgotten old woman shuffled off to die in an institution while her children spent her inheritance. I was Catherine Hartwell, and I had fight left in me yet. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Standing in that sterile room at Sunset Manor, my mind drifted back to what my life had been just weeks ago, a life that Derek and Amber had systematically dismantled while convincing everyone, including myself, that they were acting out of love. My story wasn't extraordinary by most standards, but it was mine, and it was beautiful in its simplicity. I was born Catherine Rose Mackenzie in 1952, the youngest of 3 daughters to a postal worker and a seamstress in the small town of Millfield. We weren't wealthy, but our home on Elderberry Street was filled with laughter, the smell of my mother's apple pies, and the sound of my father's old radio playing big band music on Sunday afternoons. I met Thomas Hartwell when I was 22, working as a secretary at Millfield Community Bank. He was 25, a newly hired loan officer with kind brown eyes and a smile that made my heart skip. Our courtship was traditional and sweet, Sunday drives in his beat-up Chevrolet, sharing ice cream sodas at Miller's Diner, long walks through Riverside Park, where he finally worked up the courage to kiss me under the old oak tree. We married 2 years later in a simple ceremony at St. Matthew's Church, with my mother's homemade dress and flowers from our own garden. Thomas carried me over the threshold of our first tiny apartment above Henderson's hardware store, both of us laughing so hard we nearly tumbled down the stairs. We were broke but blissfully happy, eating tuna casserole and dreaming of the future we'd build together. Derek came along in 1976, a healthy baby boy with Thomas's dark hair and my stubborn streak. Those early years were a whirlwind of sleepless nights, first steps, and the pure joy of watching our son discover the world. Thomas would spend hours on the living room floor, building elaborate train tracks and teaching Derek the names of every car that passed our window. I can still see them together, Thomas patiently showing our 3-year-old how to tie his shoes, both of them concentrating with the same intense expression. When Derek was 5, we finally saved enough to buy our dream house on Maple Ridge Drive. It wasn't grand, a modest 2-story colonial with 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, and a kitchen that opened onto a small but perfect backyard. Thomas spent that first summer building Derek a treehouse in the massive maple tree that gave our street its name. I planted rose bushes along the front walk and started the vegetable garden that would become my pride and joy for the next 40 years. Our daughter Lily arrived 3 years later, completing our family. She was Derek's opposite in every way, Where he was serious and methodical, she was spontaneous and artistic. Where Derek carefully planned every move, Lily threw herself headfirst into whatever caught her fancy. I loved watching them together, Derek patiently teaching his little sister to ride a bike while she chattered non-stop about the fairy kingdom she was convinced existed in our garden shed. The house on Maple Ridge Drive became the center of our universe. Every room held 1,000 memories. The kitchen table where we shared family dinners every night at 6 o'clock sharp, where Derek struggled through algebra homework while Lily painted watercolor masterpieces. The living room where we gathered for movie nights, all four of us piled onto the old green sofa that Thomas refused to replace because it was perfectly comfortable. The front porch where Thomas and I would sit on summer evenings, watching our children play with the neighborhood kids and planning weekend trips to the lake. Derek grew into a serious, ambitious young man. He excelled in school, played on the debate team, and had a clear plan for his future from the age of 12. He was going to study business, make something of himself, and never worry about money the way Thomas and I sometimes did. We were proud of his drive, even if we sometimes wished he would relax and enjoy his childhood a little more. Lily bloomed into a free spirit who changed her career plans weekly. Artist, veterinarian, travel writer, marine biologist. She brought home stray cats, painted murals on her bedroom walls, and wrote poetry that made me cry with its beauty. Where Derek was practical, Lily was pure emotion and creativity. Thomas worked his way up at the bank, eventually becoming the head loan officer. I took a part-time job at the local elementary school when the children were older, working in the library and falling in love with connecting kids to books. Our life was routine but rich. Sunday dinners with extended family, annual vacations to Lake Harmony, Christmas mornings that started before dawn with excited children and endless cups of coffee. The years flew by in a blur of graduations, first jobs, and eventually Derek's wedding to Amber Walsh, an ambitious young woman from Riverside Heights who worked in marketing for a pharmaceutical company. The wedding was elaborate, far more expensive than Thomas and I would have chosen, but Derek insisted on giving Amber the fairy tale wedding she'd always dreamed of. We mortgaged the house to help pay for it, happy to contribute to our son's happiness. Lily moved to Portland after college, pursuing her art and sending us photos of her latest paintings. Derek and Amber settled in nearby Oakville, close enough for regular visits but far enough away to establish their independence. Life was good, predictable, and filled with the quiet contentment that comes from a life well lived. Then Thomas had his heart attack 4 years ago. Sudden, devastating, final. One morning he was reading the newspaper at our kitchen table, commenting on the weather forecast for the weekend. By evening, I was a widow, staring at the empty chair where my husband of 43 years would never sit again. That's when everything began to change. That's when Derek's concern for my welfare began. That's when the life I'd built started slipping away, piece by carefully orchestrated piece. Thomas's funeral was held on a gray October morning at St. Matthew's Church, the same place where we'd promised to love each other until death do us part 43 years earlier. The irony wasn't lost on me as I sat in the front pew, wearing the black dress I'd hoped never to need, listening to Pastor Williams speak about eternal rest and reunion in heaven. Derek sat beside me, solid and dependable, his arm around my shoulders as I wept for the man who had been my everything. Amber sat on his other side, appropriately somber in an expensive black suit, dabbing at her eyes with a lace handkerchief. Lily had flown in from Portland, her artist's soul shattered by the sudden loss of the father who had always encouraged her creativity, even when he didn't understand it. In those first dark weeks after the funeral, Derek was everything a grieving mother could ask for in a son. He handled the insurance paperwork, helped me navigate the maze of Social Security and pension benefits, and sat with me through the long evenings when the silence in the house became unbearable. He was patient when I called him crying at midnight, gentle when I forgot to eat for days at a time, and understanding when I couldn't bear to touch Thomas's belongings. "Take all the time you need, Mom," he would say, holding my hands in his larger ones. "Dad wouldn't want you to rush through this. Grief has its own timeline." For 6 months, Derek was the perfect son. He visited twice a week, always calling first to make sure I was decent, but never making me feel like he was checking up on me. He brought groceries when I forgot to shop, fixed the leaky faucet in the kitchen that had been dripping since before Thomas died, and even helped me plant new bulbs in the garden that spring. But looking back now, I could see the subtle signs that something was shifting. The way his eyes would linger on the expensive artwork Thomas and I had collected over the years. The casual questions about our finances, disguised as concern for my security. The suggestions that maybe the house was too much for me to handle alone. The first real warning sign came 8 months after Thomas's death. I had been having a particularly difficult day, overwhelmed by the task of sorting through Thomas's closet. Derek found me sitting on our bedroom floor, surrounded by suits and shirts, crying into one of Thomas's old sweaters. "Mom, you can't keep living in the past like this," he said, sitting down beside me on the carpet. "Dad would want you to move forward." "I'm not ready," I whispered, clutching the sweater tighter. "It still smells like his cologne." Derek gently took the sweater from my hands and folded it neatly. "Maybe that's the problem. Maybe you need a fresh start, a new environment where you're not constantly reminded of what you've lost." I looked at him sharply. "This is my home, Derek. Our home. I'm not leaving." "I'm not saying you should leave," he backtracked quickly. "I'm just saying that maybe it would be good for you to get out more. Meet new people. You've barely left this house in months." That conversation planted a seed of doubt that Derek began watering carefully over the following weeks. He started pointing out things around the house that needed attention, the gutters that should be cleaned, the windows that were getting harder for me to reach, the yard work that was becoming too much for a woman my age to manage alone. "You know, Mom," he said one afternoon, as we watched me struggle to carry a bag of potting soil to my garden, "there are services that can help with this kind of thing. Or better yet, places where all the maintenance is taken care of for you." "What kind of places?" I asked, though I suspected I knew where this was heading. "Senior communities, not nursing homes," he added quickly, seeing my expression. "Active adult communities where people your age can enjoy life without worrying about home maintenance and yard work." I set down the potting soil and looked at my son. "Derek, I appreciate your concern, but I'm 71, not 91. I can still take care of my own home." "Can you?" The question came out sharper than he'd probably intended. "Mom, you forgot to pay the electric bill last month. I found it stuffed in that basket on the kitchen counter with a bunch of other mail. And what about when you left the stove on all night 2 weeks ago?" The accusations stung because they contained just enough truth to be believable. I had forgotten to pay the electric bill, but only because it had gotten mixed in with sympathy cards and I'd overlooked it. And yes, I had left a burner on low under the tea kettle one evening, but I'd caught it myself when I went to the kitchen for a glass of water. "Those were just oversights," I protested. "Everyone makes mistakes." "Of course they do," Derek agreed, his voice taking on that patient tone I was beginning to recognize. "But when you're living alone, small mistakes can become big problems. What if there had been a fire? What if the electricity had been shut off, and you'd been stuck here in the dark?" Around this same time, I began noticing that Derek's visits had a different quality to them. Instead of sitting with me to chat over coffee, he seemed to be conducting inspections. He would check the stove to make sure all the burners were off. He would flip through the mail on my kitchen counter, making disapproving noises about bills that hadn't been filed away immediately. He would peer into my refrigerator and comment on expiration dates. "Mom, this milk is 3 days past its date," he said one afternoon, holding up the carton like evidence in a trial. "It smells fine," I replied, though I dutifully threw it away to avoid an argument. "That's not the point. You're not being careful about these things. What if you'd gotten sick?" Amber began joining Derek on these visits more frequently, and I noticed she had her own agenda. While Derek focused on practical concerns, Amber seemed more interested in the house itself. "This is such a beautiful home," she would say, running her fingers along the antique mantelpiece in the living room. "Have you ever had it appraised? I bet it's worth quite a bit in today's market." "I have no idea," I would answer honestly. "Thomas and I never thought about selling." "Oh, I'm not suggesting you should sell," Amber would say with a bright smile. "I'm just curious. Real estate is so interesting, don't you think? The way property values change over time." These conversations always left me feeling unsettled, though I couldn't quite put my finger on why. Derek and Amber were family, after all. They loved me and wanted what was best for me. If they were concerned about my welfare, shouldn't I be grateful to have children who cared so much? But late at night, lying alone in the bed I'd shared with Thomas for so many years, I found myself questioning their motives. The way Derek's eyes lingered on my jewelry when he thought I wasn't looking. The way Amber asked casual questions about my bank accounts and investments. The way both of them seemed to be building a case that I was becoming incompetent, even though I felt as sharp and capable as ever. The real turning point came on a rainy Tuesday in November, almost exactly 1 year after Thomas's death. I was in the bathroom, stepping out of the shower, when my foot slipped on the wet tile floor. I fell hard, my hip hitting the edge of the bathtub, and for a moment I lay there stunned, wondering if I'd broken something. But I hadn't. After a few minutes of careful movement, I determined that I was bruised but not seriously injured. I managed to get dressed and make my way to the living room, where I called Derek to let him know what had happened. "Are you sure you're okay?" he asked, and I could hear genuine concern in his voice. "Maybe I should drive over and take you to the emergency room." "I'm fine," I assured him, "just a little sore. It was my own fault for not putting down a bath mat." Derek arrived within the hour anyway, along with Amber, both of them looking grave and worried. They insisted on examining me for injuries, checking every inch of the bathroom for other potential hazards, and lecturing me about safety precautions for people my age. "Mom, this could have been so much worse," Derek said as he installed new grab bars in the shower. "What if you'd hit your head? What if you'd been unconscious? You could have laid there for days before anyone found you." That fall became the ammunition Derek needed to escalate his campaign. Suddenly, every conversation included references to my accident and the dangers of living alone at my age. The concerned phone calls increased. The unannounced visits multiplied. And slowly, carefully, Derek began introducing the idea that maybe it was time to consider alternatives. I had no idea that this minor slip in my own bathroom would become the key that unlocked the door to my son's elaborate plan to take control of my life. The bathroom fall changed everything, though I didn't realize it at the time. What I thought was a simple accident became Derek's smoking gun, the evidence he needed to justify what came next. Within days of my tumble, he had transformed from my caring son into something else entirely, a prosecutor building a case against my independence. "Mom, we need to talk," Derek announced the following Saturday, arriving at my door with Amber and a manila folder thick with papers. They settled themselves at my kitchen table like they were conducting a business meeting, which, I suppose, they were. "Dr. Patterson called me," Derek began, referring to my family physician. "He's concerned about your fall and thinks we should discuss some safety measures." I frowned. "Dr. Patterson called you? I never gave him permission to discuss my medical information with anyone." "Actually, you did," Amber interjected smoothly, sliding a paper across the table toward me. "Remember when you updated your emergency contact information after Dad died? You listed Derek as someone the doctor could speak with in case of emergency." I stared at the form, recognizing my own handwriting, but not remembering signing anything that would give Derek access to my private medical discussions. This was for emergencies only. A minor fall hardly qualifies. "Dr. Patterson disagrees," Derek said, opening his folder. "He's recommending several modifications to your living situation. Handrails throughout the house, a medical alert system, and regular check-ins from a home health aide." The way he said it made it sound like a court order, rather than suggestions. "Those seem like reasonable precautions," I said carefully, but I can make those decisions myself. Can you? Derek's voice carried a sharpness I'd never heard before. Mom, you're 71 years old, living alone in a house that's too big for you, and you've already had one serious fall. What happens when you have another one? When, not if, I noticed. Derek, I slipped on a wet floor. It could happen to anyone at any age. Amber leaned forward with that sympathetic expression she'd perfected. Catherine, we're not trying to control your life. We're trying to protect it. You mean everything to Derek, and the thought of something happening to you. She let her voice trail off, dabbing at her eyes. The emotional manipulation was masterful, I had to admit. How could I argue against people who claimed to love me so much? But something in my gut told me this wasn't really about my safety. Over the next few weeks, Derek and Amber's campaign intensified. They began showing up at random times, always claiming they were just checking in, but clearly hoping to catch me in some compromising situation. They found plenty to criticize. One morning, Derek arrived to find me still in my robe at 10 o'clock. I'd been having a difficult night, missing Thomas terribly, and had finally fallen asleep around dawn. But Derek acted like he'd discovered me in the middle of a mental breakdown. Mom, it's the middle of the day. Are you feeling all right? Have you eaten anything? I had a late night, I explained, tying my robe tighter. I'm allowed to sleep in occasionally. Of course you are, Derek said, but I caught him exchanging a meaningful look with Amber. It's just that you used to be such an early riser. Remember how you and Dad always had breakfast together at 7:30 sharp? The implication was clear. I was falling apart, losing the structure that had once defined my life. Never mind that I was grieving, that sleeping patterns often change with age, or that I was entitled to adjust my routine however I saw fit. Another time, Amber discovered a stack of unopened mail on my hall table. Most of it was junk: credit card offers, charity solicitations, advertisements. But she made it sound like I was neglecting critical correspondence. Catherine, some of these are dated 2 weeks ago, she said, flipping through the envelopes with disapproval. What if there's something important in here? If it's important, they'll send it again, I replied, but Amber was already opening envelopes without my permission, sorting them into piles of urgent and non-urgent. Look at this, she said, holding up a notice from my homeowner's insurance. This is asking you to update your policy information. If you don't respond, you could lose your coverage. I snatched the letter from her hands and read it quickly. It was a routine request for updated property values, with no threat of cancellation mentioned anywhere. This is just a survey, Amber. It's completely optional. Are you sure? Insurance companies can be tricky about these things. Maybe Derek should help you review your policies to make sure everything's current. That's how it went. Week after week, every normal aspect of my life was scrutinized and found wanting. I forgot to take my vitamins one morning, clearly a sign of declining mental function. I bought too much food at the grocery store, evidence that I was becoming confused about quantities. I left a light on in the basement overnight, proof that I was becoming dangerously forgetful. Derek started keeping a list. I discovered this by accident when I saw him jotting notes in a small spiral notebook during one of his visits. When I asked what he was writing, he claimed it was just reminders about things around the house that needed attention. But later, when he left the notebook behind, I found pages of entries cataloging my supposed failures. November 15th, Mom, still in pajamas at 11 a.m., seemed disoriented. November 18th, multiple bills unpaid on kitchen counter, cluttered living space. November 22nd, forgot about dinner plans, had to remind her 3 times. I didn't remember forgetting any dinner plans. In fact, I was certain Derek had never mentioned any dinner plans. But there it was, written in his careful handwriting, part of a pattern he was constructing to prove I was losing my grip on reality. The psychological pressure was relentless. Every conversation became an evaluation, every interaction a test I was apparently failing. Derek would ask me questions about current events, then act concerned when I hadn't heard the latest news about some political scandal or celebrity divorce. He'd mention appointments I supposedly had, then express worry when I didn't remember making them. He'd bring up conversations we'd allegedly had, then suggest I see a doctor about my memory when I couldn't recall the details. Most insidiously, he began involving other people in his campaign. He called my next-door neighbor, Mrs. Chen, expressing concern about my declining condition and asking her to keep an eye on me. He spoke with my hairdresser, my pharmacist, even the young man who delivered my groceries, planting seeds of doubt about my competence. "People are starting to notice, Mom," he told me one December afternoon. "Mrs. Chen mentioned that you've seemed confused lately. The pharmacy called because you tried to refill a prescription too early. Even Pastor Williams asked me if everything was okay with you." Each accusation felt like a body blow. These were people I'd known for years, people who had respected me, and now Derek was turning them into witnesses against me. The isolation was devastating. I began second-guessing every decision, every conversation, every moment of forgetfulness that might be construed as evidence of my declining faculties. Christmas that year was particularly painful. Derek and Amber insisted on hosting dinner at their house, claiming it would be easier for me than cooking for everyone. But when I arrived, I found they'd invited several family friends, including Dr. Patterson and his wife. Throughout the evening, I felt like I was being observed and evaluated. Dr. Patterson asked pointed questions about how I was managing at home. Family friends expressed exaggerated concern about my situation. Derek made sure to mention my fall to everyone present, along with his worries about my safety. "We're just trying to convince Mom that she needs more support," he told the assembled group, as if I weren't sitting right there. "She's so stubborn about accepting help." The phrase, "at her age," punctuated every conversation. At her age, living alone wasn't safe. At her age, she should be thinking about her limitations. At her age, she needed to be realistic about what she could handle. I excused myself early, claiming fatigue, but really I just couldn't bear another minute of being discussed like an invalid. As Derek walked me to my car, he delivered the final blow of the evening. "Mom, I've been doing some research on senior communities in the area. There are some really nice places where you could maintain your independence but have support when you need it. Maybe we could visit a few, just to see what's available." "I'm not interested," I said firmly, but even as the words left my mouth, I could feel my resolve weakening under the constant pressure. "Just think about it," Derek said, hugging me goodbye. "That's all I'm asking. Promise me you'll think about it." As I drove home through the dark December streets, I realized that Derek wasn't asking me to think about moving. He was wearing me down, systematically dismantling my confidence until the idea of giving up my independence seemed not just reasonable but inevitable. What I didn't know was that he was already far ahead of me, making plans that would soon transform his suggestions into reality. By January, Derek's relentless campaign had worn me down more than I cared to admit. The constant questioning of my judgment, the endless parade of concerned neighbors and friends, the subtle but persistent suggestions that I was becoming a burden, it all combined to create a fog of self-doubt that clouded my thinking. When Derek called on a frigid Tuesday morning in late January, his voice carried an urgency I hadn't heard before. "Mom, I need you to come with me to see a lawyer today. It's important." "A lawyer? What for?" I asked, immediately suspicious. "Just some paperwork we need to get in order. Estate planning stuff that Dad should have taken care of years ago. I've made an appointment with Harold Brennan downtown. He's supposed to be the best." The mention of estate planning made my stomach clench. "Derek, I'm not ready to think about that yet. Your father just died a little over a year ago." "Mom, that's exactly why we need to do this now. Look what happened when Dad died suddenly. We were scrambling to figure out everything. Bank accounts, insurance policies, the house deed. If something happened to you..." His voice caught dramatically. "I just want to make sure everything is properly organized so there's no confusion later." Put that way, it sounded reasonable. Responsible, even. Thomas had always handled our financial affairs, and I had been overwhelmed by the paperwork maze after his death. Maybe Derek was right. Maybe it would be smart to get everything properly documented. "What kind of paperwork?" I asked cautiously. "Just basic stuff. A will, if you don't already have one updated since Dad died. Medical directives in case you're ever incapacitated. And a power of attorney, so if you're ever unable to make decisions, someone you trust can handle things for you." Power of attorney. The words sent a chill through me, though I couldn't say exactly why. I don't like the idea of giving someone else control over my affairs. It's not control, Mom. It's protection. Think of it as an insurance policy. You'd still make all your own decisions. The power of attorney would only activate if you were unconscious in a hospital or had dementia or something like that. God forbid anything like that ever happens, but if it did, wouldn't you want me handling things instead of some court-appointed stranger? Derek had an answer for everything, a logical explanation that made my concerns seem foolish and paranoid. When I hesitated, he played his trump card. "Amber's grandmother went through this exact situation last year. She didn't have any legal documents in place when she had her stroke, and the family had to spend months in court just to get permission to pay her bills and manage her care. The legal fees alone cost them over $20,000. The thought of Derek and Lily having to fight through court bureaucracy while I lay helpless in a hospital bed was genuinely distressing. Maybe Derek was being practical rather than manipulative. Maybe I was overthinking this because of my own grief and confusion. "All right," I said finally, "but I want to read everything carefully before I sign anything." "Of course," Derek said, and I could hear the relief in his voice. "Mr. Brennan will explain every document in detail. That's what we're paying him for." Harold Brennan's office was in a gleaming downtown high-rise, all polished marble and expensive artwork. The lawyer himself was probably in his 50s, with silver hair and the kind of confident demeanor that came from charging $400 an hour. Derek and Amber were already waiting in the reception area when I arrived, both dressed formally as if this were some kind of special occasion. "Mrs. Hartwell," Brennan greeted me warmly, shaking my hand with just the right amount of sympathetic pressure. "I'm so sorry for the loss of your husband. Derek has told me what a wonderful man he was." Brennan led us into his office, where neat stacks of documents waited on his polished conference table. "Now then, let's go through these one at a time so you understand exactly what each document accomplishes." The will was straightforward, everything to Derek and Lily in equal shares, with specific bequests for my jewelry and Thomas's watch. The medical directives were standard forms giving instructions about end-of-life care. But when we got to the power of attorney documents, I felt that familiar unease returning. "This is a comprehensive power of attorney," Brennan explained, pointing to the thick document. "It gives your designated agent, in this case Derek, the authority to handle all your financial and legal affairs if you become incapacitated." "What exactly does incapacitated mean?" I asked, scanning the dense legal language. "Oh, the usual things," Brennan said with a dismissive wave. "If you're unconscious, mentally incompetent due to illness or injury, or if a doctor determines you're unable to make sound decisions for yourself." Who determines if I'm unable to make sound decisions? Well, typically it would be your primary care physician, though the document does allow for second opinions if there's any question. I thought about Dr. Patterson, who had already been discussing my condition with Derek without my permission. And if Derek has this power of attorney, what exactly can he do? "Essentially, everything you could do yourself," Brennan replied. "Pay bills, manage investments, buy or sell property, make medical decisions if you're unable to communicate your wishes." "Buy or sell property?" I looked sharply at Derek. "That seems like a lot of authority." Derek leaned forward earnestly. "Mom, we'd never do anything you wouldn't want us to do. This is just in case of emergency. If you had a stroke or dementia, someone would need to be able to manage your affairs." "But what if I disagree with Derek's decisions?" What if I think I'm perfectly capable of making my own choices? Brennan and Derek exchanged a quick glance that made my skin crawl. Well, Brennan said carefully, if there's medical evidence that you're not thinking clearly, your opinion might not carry much weight legally. The trap was becoming visible now, the careful wording that would allow my own son to override my wishes if he could find a doctor willing to declare me incompetent. But I was already too deep into this process to back out gracefully, and Derek was watching me with those patient, loving eyes that made me feel guilty for my suspicions. There are some additional provisions, Brennan continued, flipping to another section. This clause gives Derek the authority to place you in appropriate care facilities if your safety is at risk. And this section allows him to consolidate your assets for easier management. What kind of care facilities? I asked, though I was beginning to suspect I knew. Oh, assisted living, nursing homes, memory care units, whatever your medical needs require. Derek reached over and patted my hand. Mom, this is all just worst-case scenario stuff. We're hoping we'll never need to use any of these provisions. But if something happened to you, wouldn't you want to know that everything was already set up legally so we could take care of you without any delays or complications? He made it sound so reasonable, so loving. A son preparing to care for his aging mother, protecting her from bureaucratic nightmares and legal complications. How could I argue with that without seeming ungrateful or paranoid? I'd like to take these documents home and review them more carefully, I said, reaching for the papers. Actually, Brennan interjected smoothly, I'd prefer if the originals stayed here until they're signed and notarized. Legal documents can be tricky. If they're damaged or lost, we'd have to start the whole process over. But I can certainly provide you with copies to review. Derek nodded approvingly. That makes sense. Besides, Mom, Mr. Brennan has explained everything clearly. These are all standard documents that every responsible adult should have. The pressure was subtle but unmistakable. Derek had already paid Brennan's fee. They'd taken time out of their busy schedules to arrange this meeting. Everyone was treating this as a formality, a simple matter of signing papers that any reasonable person would want to have. I suppose you're right, I said slowly, picking up the pen Brennan offered me. As I signed my name to document after document, I felt like I was signing my life away. But Derek was beside me, squeezing my shoulder encouragingly, telling me how proud he was that I was being so responsible and forward-thinking. There, Brennan said as I finished the last signature, all done. I'll file these with the appropriate courts and send certified copies to Derek. Mrs. Hartwell, you should feel very secure knowing that your affairs are now properly organized. Outside the lawyer's office, Derek and Amber seemed almost giddy with relief. I'm so glad we got that taken care of, Derek said, hugging me tightly. Now I won't have to worry about what would happen if there was ever an emergency. We should celebrate, Amber suggested brightly. Why don't we take you to lunch, Catherine? There's a lovely new restaurant downtown that Derek's been wanting to try. As we walked to the restaurant, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd just made a terrible mistake. The power of attorney felt like a loaded gun that I'd handed to my son, trusting him never to pull the trigger. But Derek was my child, the boy I'd raised to be honest and caring. Surely my instincts were wrong. Surely he would never abuse the trust I'd just placed in him. 3 weeks later, I would discover just how naive that assumption had been. 3 weeks after signing those documents, I was sitting at my kitchen table sorting through seed catalogs for my spring garden when Derek and Amber arrived unannounced. There was something different about them that day, an excitement barely contained beneath their usual masks of concern. They moved through my house with a proprietary air that made me deeply uncomfortable. Mom, we have some wonderful news, Derek announced, settling into the chair across from me while Amber busied herself making coffee without being asked. Amber and I have been selected for an incredible opportunity. The pharmaceutical company she works for is sending her to oversee the opening of their new European division. We'll be based in Switzerland for 2 years. I looked up from my catalogs, confused. That's wonderful for you both. When would you leave? That's the thing, Amber said, bringing over coffee mugs and speaking with barely contained enthusiasm. We need to leave in 6 weeks. It's a huge career opportunity for me, and Derek's company has agreed to let him work remotely from Europe. 6 weeks, I repeated slowly. That's very sudden. Derek leaned forward, his expression shifting to that familiar look of concern. That's what we wanted to talk to you about, Mom. We can't possibly leave you here alone for 2 years, especially after everything that's happened with your health and safety issues. My health is fine, I said firmly. And what safety issues? I had one minor fall months ago. Mom, let's be realistic, Derek said, pulling out his ever-present notebook. In the past 6 months, you've had the bathroom fall, you've forgotten to pay bills multiple times, you left the stove on overnight, you've seemed confused during several of our conversations. Each accusation felt like a slap. Half of these incidents were exaggerated or misrepresented, but Derek presented them like an irrefutable medical record. I've been managing just fine, I protested, but even as I said it, I could hear the doubt creeping into my own voice. Derek's months of psychological warfare had done their work. Amber sat down beside me and took my hands in hers. Catherine, we found the perfect solution. There's a beautiful senior community called Sunset Manor, about 30 minutes from here. It's not a nursing home. It's more like a resort for active seniors. You'd have your own apartment, but there would be people nearby if you needed help. My blood ran cold. I'm not moving to any senior community. This is my home. We know how attached you are to this house, Derek said smoothly. But Mom, you have to think practically. It's too big for you, too expensive to maintain, and too isolated. What if you fell again and no one found you for days? Mrs. Chen lives right next door, I pointed out. I have friends, neighbors. Mrs. Chen is 83 years old, Derek countered. She's hardly in a position to be your caregiver, and your other neighbors work full-time. They can't be checking on you constantly. Amber squeezed my hands tighter. We've already arranged for you to tour Sunset Manor tomorrow. Just to look. You don't have to make any decisions right away. I don't want to tour anywhere, I said, pulling my hands free. I'm not leaving my home. Derek's patient facade cracked slightly. Mom, you're not being reasonable. We can't leave the country knowing you're here alone, possibly having accidents or medical emergencies with no one to help you. Then don't leave the country, I shot back. No one's forcing you to take this job. The look that passed between Derek and Amber was electric with anger, though they quickly composed themselves. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for our careers, Amber said, her voice taking on a harder edge. We can't pass it up because of unfounded fears. Unfounded? I stared at her. Since when is wanting to stay in my own home an unfounded fear? Derek stood up abruptly and began pacing my kitchen. Mom, we've been patient with you. We've tried to help you see reason, but we can't enable you to make dangerous choices anymore. There was something in his tone that sent ice through my veins. What do you mean by that? I mean, Derek said, stopping to face me directly, that we have a legal responsibility to ensure your safety. Dr. Patterson agrees that you shouldn't be living alone anymore. Dr. Patterson has no right to make decisions about my living arrangements, I said, standing up myself, and neither do you. Derek pulled a folded paper from his jacket pocket. Actually, Mom, I do. He handed me the document, and I recognized it immediately. A medical evaluation signed by Dr. Patterson, stating that I showed signs of cognitive decline and was at risk living independently. The evaluation was dated just 3 days ago, but I hadn't seen Dr. Patterson in over a month. When did he examine me for this? I demanded. He based it on our conversations about your condition, Derek replied. All the incidents we've documented, the falls, the confusion, the forgetfulness. He agrees that you need supervised care. This is fraud, I whispered, staring at the medical evaluation. He can't diagnose me without examining me. He's known you for 15 years, Mom. He has extensive medical records. And frankly, he's concerned about the deterioration he's observed during your recent visits. I tried to remember my last appointment with Dr. Patterson. It had been routine: blood pressure check, prescription renewal. We chatted about the weather and my garden. There had been nothing that could be construed as cognitive decline. Amber stood up and moved to stand beside Derek, presenting a united front. "Catherine, we're not trying to hurt you. We're trying to protect you. Sunset Manor is a beautiful place with wonderful amenities. You'll make new friends, have activities, and most importantly, you'll be safe." "And if I refuse to go?" Derek's expression hardened. "Mom, I have power of attorney and a medical recommendation that you need supervised care. I can place you in an appropriate facility whether you agree or not." The words hit me like a physical blow. The documents I'd signed just 3 weeks ago, trusting my son to use them only in genuine emergencies, were now being weaponized against me. "This isn't an emergency," I said desperately. "I'm perfectly competent. I can live in my own home." "The medical evaluation says otherwise," Derek replied coldly. "Dr. Patterson specifically recommends assisted living care." I looked at my son, really looked at him, and saw a stranger. The caring, concerned boy I'd raised had been replaced by someone calculating and ruthless. This was planned, wasn't it? The power of attorney, the medical evaluation, even this European job offer. You orchestrated all of this. Amber had the grace to look slightly ashamed, but Derek met my gaze steadily. "We planned for contingencies, yes. We knew you'd resist what's best for you, so we made sure we had the legal authority to act in your best interests." "My best interests?" I laughed bitterly. "And I suppose selling my house is also in my best interests?" The mask slipped completely then. Derek and Amber exchanged a look of surprise and anger. "How did you—" Derek began, then caught himself. "Mom, the house will need to be sold to pay for your care at Sunset Manor. Quality assisted living is expensive." "You've already contacted real estate agents, haven't you?" I accused, "before you even told me about any of this." Derek's silence was answer enough. "You're stealing my life," I whispered. "My home, my independence, my money. You're taking everything." "We're ensuring you get proper care," Derek said, but his voice lacked conviction now. "The house is too much for you to manage, and the proceeds will guarantee you can afford the best possible care for the rest of your life." "While you two live it up in Europe on my dime," I said, the pieces finally falling into place. "That's what this is really about, isn't it? You needed me out of the way and my assets available to fund your adventure abroad." Amber's face flushed red. "That's not— we would never." "Save it," I cut her off. "I see exactly what this is now." Derek straightened his shoulders, all pretense of loving concern abandoned. "Mom, the decision has been made. We tour Sunset Manor tomorrow, and you'll be moving there within the week. The house goes on the market immediately after that." "And if I refuse?" "Then I'll have you declared incompetent and moved to a facility against your will," Derek said with chilling matter-of-factness. "At least this way you have some choice in where you go." I stared at my son, this stranger wearing my child's face, and felt something die inside me. Not hope. Surprisingly, that flickered stronger than ever. But whatever maternal love and trust I'd felt for Derek crumbled into dust. "Get out of my house," I said quietly. Derek nodded as if he'd expected this reaction. "We'll pick you up at 10 tomorrow morning for the tour. I suggest you use tonight to start thinking about what personal items you'd like to bring with you to your new home." They left without another word, and I stood in my kitchen listening to their car drive away. The house felt different now. No longer my sanctuary, but a prize being fought over by people who saw me as nothing more than an obstacle to their ambitions. But Derek had made one crucial mistake. He'd shown his hand too early, revealed the full scope of his betrayal before he had me safely locked away. He thought he was dealing with a confused, declining old woman who would meekly accept whatever fate he'd chosen for her. He was about to learn just how wrong he was. The tour of Sunset Manor the next morning was a masterclass in psychological manipulation disguised as kindness. Derek and Amber arrived at my door at exactly 10 o'clock. both dressed professionally as if this were a business meeting rather than the systematic dismantling of my life. "Good morning, Mom," Derek said with forced cheerfulness. "Ready to see your new home?" I had spent the entire night awake, pacing through my house, touching familiar objects, trying to absorb 43 years of memories before they were stolen from me. I had considered calling Lily in Portland, but what could she do from 3,000 miles away? I had thought about calling the police, but Derek had legal documents that would make me look like a confused old woman causing trouble for her caring son. "I'm only going to look," I said firmly as I got into Derek's car. "I'm not agreeing to anything." "Of course not," Amber said from the front passenger seat, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "We just want you to see how lovely it is. I think you'll be pleasantly surprised." Sunset Manor sat on beautifully landscaped grounds 30 minutes outside Willowbrook, a collection of low-rise buildings designed to look more like a resort than an institution. The marketing was sophisticated. They called it a premier senior living community rather than a nursing home, and the lobby could have belonged to an upscale hotel. We were greeted by Rebecca Torres, the admissions coordinator, a polished woman in her 40s with the kind of professional smile that never quite reached her eyes. She had clearly been briefed on my situation. "Mrs. Hartwell," she said warmly, taking my hand in both of hers, "we're so delighted that you're considering joining our family here at Sunset Manor. Your son Derek has told me so much about you." I noticed she didn't say I had chosen to visit, only that I was considering joining. The language was carefully crafted to suggest this was my decision, rather than something being imposed on me. Rebecca led us through the common areas first, a spacious dining room with white tablecloths and fresh flowers, a library with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the gardens, a fitness center equipped with senior-friendly exercise machines, and a craft room where several residents were working on watercolor paintings. Everything was beautiful, clean, and depressingly institutional. The residents we encountered seemed pleasant enough, but there was something in their eyes. A resignation, a dimming of the spark that comes from being in control of your own life. They smiled and nodded politely as Rebecca introduced me, but I could see my own future in their faces. Comfortable captivity. "And here," Rebecca said, opening a door on the second floor, "is the apartment we have available for you." The space was actually quite nice. A large studio with a kitchenette, a separate sleeping area, and a small balcony overlooking the gardens. It was furnished with generic but quality pieces, all designed for safety and accessibility. Grab bars in the bathroom, rounded corners on all furniture, emergency call buttons in every room. "As you can see, everything is designed with your comfort and safety in mind," Rebecca explained. "Housekeeping comes twice a week, meals are provided in the dining room or can be delivered to your apartment, and we have a full medical staff on site 24 hours a day." Derek walked to the window and looked out at the view. "This is perfect, Mom. Look how peaceful it is. And you'll have so many activities to keep you busy." "What if I want to leave?" I asked suddenly. "What if I want to visit friends or go shopping or just take a drive?" Rebecca's smile flickered slightly. "Well, we do ask that residents inform the front desk when they're leaving the property, just for safety reasons. And depending on your care level, we might require that you're accompanied by a family member or aide." "Care level?" I looked at Derek suspiciously. "Oh, that's just our way of ensuring everyone gets the appropriate level of support," Rebecca said smoothly. "Some residents are completely independent, while others need more assistance with daily activities." Derek pulled Rebecca aside for a quiet conversation while I stood in the empty apartment, trying to imagine myself living there. The walls were painted a cheerful yellow, but they felt like they were closing in on me. Through the window, I could see residents walking slowly along the paved paths, some with walkers, others arm in arm with staff members. It looked pleasant enough, but it wasn't freedom. "Mom," Derek said, returning to my side, "Rebecca says they have an opening immediately. We could have you moved in by this weekend." "This weekend?" I felt panic rising in my chest. "That's only 3 days away." "We know it seems fast," Amber said, But it's actually perfect timing. Derek and I can help you get settled before we leave for Europe. I haven't agreed to any of this, I said, but my voice sounded weak even to my own ears. Derek's expression hardened slightly. Mom, we've discussed this. The decision has been made. You're not safe living alone anymore, and we can't leave the country knowing you're at risk. Rebecca seemed to sense the tension in the room. Why don't I give you folks some privacy to discuss the details, she said diplomatically. I'll be in my office when you're ready to proceed with the paperwork. After she left, Derek closed the apartment door and turned to face me. Gone was any pretense of this being my choice. Mom, here's what's going to happen, he said, in the same tone he might use to explain a business deal. You're going to move into this apartment this weekend. The house will go on the market Monday morning. Your belongings will be sorted, and anything you can't fit here will be donated or sold. You can't do this, I whispered, but we both knew he could. I can and I will, Derek replied. I have power of attorney and a medical recommendation. If you fight me on this, I'll have you declared incompetent and placed in a locked memory care unit instead. At least here, you'll have some freedom and dignity. The threat was clear. Submit to this comfortable prison or be sent somewhere much worse. Amber moved to stand beside Derek, their united front complete. Catherine, I know this is hard, but once you're settled here, you'll see how much better it is. No more worrying about home maintenance or safety issues. No more isolation. You'll make new friends and have activities to keep you engaged. I looked around the apartment one more time, trying to find some escape route, some argument that would penetrate their determination. But I was one 71-year-old woman against two ruthless people who had planned this for months, maybe years. When do you leave for Europe? I asked quietly. 2 weeks, Derek answered. Just enough time to get you settled and the house sale process started. And you'll visit me when you get back? Derek and Amber exchanged a glance. Mom, we'll be gone for 2 years minimum. The company might extend Amber's assignment if things go well. But we'll call, of course, and maybe you can visit us in Switzerland once you're more settled here. The lie was so transparent it was almost insulting. They had no intention of maintaining any real relationship with me once I was safely tucked away, and my assets were in their control. I would be an inconvenient reminder of what they'd done, someone to be managed from a distance. I walked to the window and looked out at the gardens again. In the distance, I could see the fence that surrounded the property. Tall, decorative, but definitely a barrier. The residents walking the paths stayed well within its bounds. I need some time to think, I said finally. There's nothing to think about, Derek replied. The decision has been made. We'll pick you up Saturday morning to move you in. As we drove back to my house, I sat in the back seat feeling like a condemned prisoner being returned to her cell before execution. Derek and Amber chatted cheerfully about the European adventure awaiting them, discussing Swiss ski resorts and Italian vineyards they planned to visit with my money. Back in my kitchen, surrounded by the familiar objects and memories of my real life, I felt the full weight of my helplessness. Derek had outmaneuvered me completely. He had the legal authority to override my wishes, a fraudulent medical evaluation to justify his actions, and a plan so carefully constructed that any resistance on my part would only make me look more incompetent. I called Lily that evening, but Derek had beaten me to it. My daughter was sympathetic but convinced that Derek was acting in my best interests. Mom, I know it's hard to leave the house, she said over the crackling long-distance connection. But Derek says Sunset Manor is really nice. And honestly, I've been worried about you too. Maybe this will be good for you. Even my own daughter had been turned against me. That night, I lay in my bed, perhaps for the last time, and stared at the ceiling I had looked at for 43 years. In 3 days, I would be sleeping in a institutional bed in a sterile apartment, my independence gone, my home sold, my life reduced to whatever Derek decided to allow me. For the first time since Thomas died, I understood what true despair felt like. It wasn't just sadness or grief. It was the complete absence of hope, The certainty that my story was ending not with dignity and choice, but with defeat and betrayal. But even in that darkest moment, a small voice in the back of my mind whispered that this wasn't over. Derek thought he had won, but he had made one crucial error. He had underestimated his mother's capacity for survival, and he had forgotten that sometimes the most dangerous opponent is the one who has nothing left to lose. Saturday morning arrived with the finality of an execution date. Derek and Amber pulled into my driveway at exactly 9 o'clock, their car followed by a small moving truck that would transport the few possessions they deemed appropriate for my new life. I had spent Friday packing 2 suitcases with clothes and a handful of personal items. Photos of Thomas and the children, my jewelry box, a few books, my Bible. Everything else would remain behind to be sorted, sold, or discarded at Derek's discretion. The next few hours passed in a blur of forced cheerfulness and barely suppressed rage. Derek and Amber moved through my house like estate sale organizers, evaluating my possessions with cold efficiency. 43 years of memories were reduced to keep, donate, or trash piles. "Mom, you really don't need all these kitchen gadgets," Amber said, holding up the hand mixer Thomas had bought me for my 50th birthday. "Sunset Manor provides all meals. This is just clutter." I watched helplessly as my life was dismantled around me, each discarded item another piece of my identity stripped away. By noon, we were loading my meager belongings into Derek's car, and I was taking what I thought might be my last look at the house where I'd been truly happy. At Sunset Manor, Rebecca Torres greeted us with the same professional warmth, but this time there was no pretense that I was here voluntarily. The paperwork was already prepared, and Derek signed most of it himself using his power of attorney. I was given a few forms to initial, but the crucial decisions had already been made without my input. "Mrs. Hartwell," Rebecca said as we finished the administrative process, "I'd like you to meet Janet Woolsey. She's been a resident here for 6 months and has volunteered to help you get oriented." Janet was a small, bird-like woman in her late 70s with steel gray hair and sharp blue eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. She shook my hand with surprising firmness and studied my face with the intensity of someone who had learned to read people quickly. "Welcome to Sunset Manor, Catherine," she said. "May I call you Catherine? Excellent. And please, call me Janet. We're not formal here." Derek and Amber lingered for about an hour, making a show of helping me unpack and settling me into my new environment. But their eagerness to leave was palpable, and eventually they made their excuses. "We'll call you once we're settled in Switzerland," Derek said, giving me a perfunctory hug. "Take care of yourself, Mom." Amber's farewell was even more hollow. "Enjoy getting to know everyone, Catherine. I'm sure you'll love it here." And then they were gone, leaving me standing in my sterile apartment with Janet Woolsey as my only companion. "Well," Janet said after we watched Derek's car disappear through the lobby windows, "that was quite a performance. Would you like some tea?" I always find that difficult transitions go better with a proper cup of tea. Something in her tone, knowing, sympathetic, but not pitying, made me look at her more carefully. "You saw through that whole charade, didn't you?" Janet smiled grimly. "Honey, I've been watching families dump their inconvenient relatives here for 6 months. I can spot a railroading from across the lobby. The question is, are you planning to just accept it, or are you going to fight back?" Her directness was startling after months of Derek's manipulative concern and Amber's false sweetness. "Fight back? How? They have legal authority over me now." "Legal authority isn't the same as being right," Janet said, leading me to the small seating area near my window. "And there are more ways to fight than you might think. But first, tell me what really happened. All of it." Over the next 2 hours, Janet listened without interruption as I poured out the whole story. Derek's gradual campaign of undermining my confidence, the manipulative medical evaluation, the power of attorney trap, the forced placement at Sunset Manor. Janet asked occasional clarifying questions, but mostly let me talk. "Your son's quite the operator," she said when I finished. "Methodical, patient, and absolutely ruthless. He reminds me of my nephew Richard. Your nephew did something similar? Tried to, Janet said with satisfaction. Key word being tried. That's actually how I ended up here, though not quite the way Richard planned. Janet's story unfolded like a masterclass in fighting back against family predators. Her nephew had attempted a similar scheme after her husband died, using her grief and isolation to position himself as her caretaker and financial manager. But Janet had been a retired paralegal who understood the legal system better than Richard realized. The trick, Janet explained, is that power of attorney documents can be challenged if you can prove they were obtained through fraud or duress. Medical evaluations can be disputed with second opinions. And there are laws protecting elderly people from financial abuse, even when it's committed by family members. But Derek has everything legally documented. Dr. Patterson's evaluation, the power of attorney. Dr. Patterson never actually examined you for cognitive issues, did he? Janet asked sharply. That evaluation was based on hearsay and your son's manipulative reports. Any competent physician who actually assessed you would reach very different conclusions. For the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of hope. You really think there's a way to fight this? I think there are several ways to fight this, Janet said. But you'll need allies, and you'll need to be smart about it. Fortunately, you've come to the right place for both. Over the next few days, Janet introduced me to what she called the Resistance, a small group of Sunset Manor residents who had either successfully fought their own family predators or were supporting others in similar battles. There was Harold Brennan, a retired accountant whose daughter had tried to steal his pension, and Dr. Eleanor Walsh, a former psychology professor who had become an expert in elder abuse cases after her own son attempted to have her declared incompetent. The first thing you need to understand, Dr. Walsh explained during one of our evening gatherings in the library, is that what happened to you is far more common than people realize. Adult children bilking their elderly parents out of property and savings, using legal documents and medical professionals to legitimize their theft. Harold nodded grimly. The system is set up to protect vulnerable seniors, but it can also be manipulated by people who understand how to work it. Your son did his homework. But so can we, Janet added. Harold still has contacts in the financial world. Eleanor understands the psychology of manipulation, and I know the legal system. Together, we can build a case to challenge everything your son has done. Dr. Walsh leaned forward intently. Catherine, what we're proposing isn't just about getting your money and property back, though that's certainly part of it. This is about reclaiming your dignity and your right to self-determination. But I need to know, are you prepared for a real fight? Because Derek won't give up easily when he realizes you're not the helpless victim he thought you were. I thought about my house on Maple Ridge Drive, probably already showing to potential buyers. I thought about Derek and Amber planning their European adventure with my money. Most of all, I thought about the way Derek had looked at me when he dropped the pretense of caring, like I was nothing more than an obstacle to be removed. Yes, I said firmly, I'm ready to fight. Janet smiled for the first time since I'd met her. Good, because we've been waiting for the right case to really send a message. Your son's been so thorough in his documentation that when we prove he's wrong, it's going to be spectacular. What do we do first? I asked. First, we get you a real medical evaluation from a doctor who hasn't been compromised by your son, Harold said. Then we start documenting everything. Every lie Derek told, every manipulation he used, every legal corner he cut. Dr. Walsh pulled out a notebook. And we build a psychological profile showing how he systematically undermined your confidence and isolated you from potential support systems. It's a classic pattern of elder abuse. And once a judge sees it laid out clearly, Derek's going to have some very uncomfortable questions to answer. There's something else, Janet said quietly. We need to think about what Derek's going to do when he realizes you're fighting back. Men like him don't just accept defeat gracefully. He'll try to discredit you, maybe claim you're being manipulated by new people, possibly even try to have you moved to a more restrictive facility. The thought was terrifying, but I found myself feeling more determined rather than more afraid. Then we'd better make sure our case is airtight before he knows what's happening. Harold grinned. Now you're thinking like a strategist. This is going to be fun. As I walked back to my apartment that night, I realized that for the first time since Thomas died, I didn't feel alone. Derek had expected to warehouse me here among other defeated elderly people, but instead he had inadvertently connected me with exactly the allies I needed to fight back. He thought he was so clever, manipulating a grief-stricken old woman into signing away her rights. But he had made one crucial miscalculation. He had underestimated both his mother's resilience and the power of people who refused to go quietly into that good night. The war wasn't over. In fact, it was just beginning. The investigation began the following Monday morning in the Sunset Manor Library, where our small resistance group had claimed a corner table that quickly became our war room. Janet arrived with a legal pad and several manila folders. Harold brought his laptop and a briefcase full of financial documents, and Dr. Walsh carried a stack of psychology textbooks and case studies. The first rule of building a case, Janet explained, is documentation. Everything Derek did, every lie he told, every manipulation he used, we need it all written down with dates, witnesses, and supporting evidence. Dr. Walsh opened her notebook and looked at me seriously. Catherine, I need you to walk through Derek's campaign again, but this time we're going to analyze each incident for signs of psychological manipulation. What seemed like loving concern was actually a systematic program of undermining your confidence and isolating you from support systems. Over the next 2 hours, we dissected Derek's behavior with clinical precision. The way he had gradually increased his visits after Thomas died, ostensibly to help but actually to gather ammunition. His careful documentation of my minor mistakes and oversights, building a false narrative of cognitive decline. The involvement of Dr. Patterson without my knowledge or consent. The manipulation of neighbors and friends to validate his concerns. This is textbook elder abuse, Dr. Walsh said, making notes as I spoke. He isolated you emotionally by making you doubt your own perceptions. He isolated you socially by convincing others you were declining. And he isolated you financially through the power of attorney trap. Harold was reviewing documents on his laptop, occasionally asking pointed questions about my financial situation. Catherine, do you remember the exact amount in your savings account before Derek gained access? And what about the value of your house? Do you have any recent appraisal documents? I have bank statements in my safety deposit box, I said. And Thomas had the house appraised 2 years ago for insurance purposes. The paperwork should be in our file cabinet. We need to get access to that information, Harold said. If Derek is using your money to fund his European adventure, there will be a paper trail. Banks are required to keep detailed records of all transactions, especially large transfers between accounts. Janet leaned forward. That's where things get tricky. Derek has legal authority over your accounts now, but there are ways around that if we can prove he obtained that authority fraudulently. How do we prove fraud? I asked. We start with Dr. Patterson's medical evaluation, Dr. Walsh replied. That document is the foundation of Derek's entire case. If we can prove it's fraudulent or based on false information, everything else collapses. Janet pulled out one of her folders. I've been doing some research on Dr. Patterson. He's been your family doctor for 15 years, correct? And he's never specialized in geriatric psychiatry or cognitive assessment? No, he's just a general practitioner. Very nice man, but I can't imagine why he would have signed off on Derek's claims about my mental state. Because Derek fed him a carefully crafted story, Dr. Walsh said grimly. Your son presented himself as a concerned family member reporting troubling changes in your behavior. Dr. Patterson probably thought he was doing the right thing by documenting those concerns. Harold looked up from his laptop. But here's the key question. Did Dr. Patterson actually examine you for cognitive issues, or did he base his evaluation entirely on Derek's reports? I thought back to my last appointment with Dr. Patterson. He never did any cognitive testing. No memory assessments, no psychological evaluation. We just talked about my blood pressure and renewed my prescriptions. Perfect, Janet said with satisfaction. A medical evaluation that doesn't include an actual medical examination is worthless. We can challenge that easily. Dr. Walsh was making more notes. We'll need to get you a proper cognitive assessment from a qualified geriatric psychiatrist. Someone with real credentials in elder mental health, not just a family doctor going on hearsay. I know just the person, Harold said. Dr. Michael Hendricks at University Medical Center. He's considered the best geriatric psychiatrist in the state, and he's testified in several elder abuse cases. If anyone can document your true mental state, it's him. Janet nodded approvingly. Good. While we're arranging that, we need to start gathering evidence about Derek's financial misconduct. Harold, can you help Catherine request copies of all her bank records? Already on it, Harold replied. There are specific forms we can use to request account histories, even when someone else has power of attorney. Banks are required to provide this information to the account holder. Over the following week, our investigation took on the intensity of a professional legal case. Dr. Walsh arranged for me to meet with Dr. Hendricks, who conducted a comprehensive cognitive assessment that took nearly 3 hours. He tested my memory, reasoning ability, problem-solving skills, and emotional stability using standardized psychological instruments. Mrs. Hartwell, Dr. Hendricks said after reviewing my results, I can state unequivocally that you show no signs of cognitive impairment or diminished capacity. Your test scores are well within normal ranges for someone your age, and in several areas you performed better than average. Can you put that in writing? I asked. Absolutely. I'll prepare a detailed report that can be used in legal proceedings. Dr. Patterson's evaluation appears to be based on incomplete information and fails to meet professional standards for cognitive assessment. Meanwhile, Harold was working his financial contacts to trace Derek's use of my money. What he discovered was even worse than I had imagined. Catherine, your son has been very busy, Harold said grimly during one of our evening meetings. In the 3 weeks since gaining control of your accounts, he's transferred over $200,000 to his personal checking account. The number hit me like a physical blow. $200,000? But he said the money was for my care at Sunset Manor. Sunset Manor costs about $4,000 a month, Janet said. Even if you lived here for 10 years, it wouldn't cost $200,000. Derek has been looting your accounts. Harold pulled out a stack of bank statements. It gets worse. He's also taken out a substantial loan against your house, essentially borrowing money using your property as collateral, and he's opened several credit cards in your name. Identity theft, Dr. Walsh said flatly. That's what this is. Financial elder abuse combined with identity theft. Can we stop him? I asked, feeling sick at the scope of Derek's betrayal. We can file an emergency injunction to freeze all your accounts, Janet replied. And we can report the identity theft to the police. But we need to be strategic about timing. Once we show our hand, Derek will try to cover his tracks and probably escalate his attacks on you. Dr. Walsh leaned forward intently. Catherine, when Derek realizes you're fighting back, he's going to claim that you're being manipulated by us. He'll probably try to have you moved to a locked memory care unit or argue that you're not competent to make decisions. We need to be prepared for that. The thought was terrifying, but I felt stronger now than I had in months. What do we need to do to protect against that? Multiple medical evaluations from different doctors, all reaching the same conclusion about your competence, Dr. Walsh said. Video recordings of you clearly explaining the situation in your own words. Documentation of Derek's financial crimes, and witnesses who can testify about his manipulation tactics. Harold was already making a list. I can document all the financial irregularities. Janet can handle the legal challenges to the power of attorney. Dr. Walsh can provide the psychological profile of Derek's manipulation. And Rebecca Torres can testify about Derek's behavior during your admission here, Janet added. I've been talking to her informally, and she remembers being uncomfortable with how your son handled the situation. Over the next few days, we assembled what Harold called the nuclear option, a comprehensive case file that exposed every aspect of Derek's scheme. Bank records showing unauthorized transfers, medical evaluations proving my competence, documentation of Derek's lies and manipulations. Even security camera footage from the bank showing Derek accessing my accounts without my knowledge. "This is enough to put Derek in prison," Janet said as we reviewed the completed file. "Financial elder abuse, identity theft, fraud. He's committed multiple felonies." Dr. Walsh looked at me seriously. "But Catherine, you need to understand what you're choosing. If we move forward with this, you're not just fighting for your money and independence, you're ending your relationship with your son forever. Are you prepared for that?" I thought about the little boy Derek had been, the young man I'd been so proud of, the caring son who had comforted me after Thomas died. That person was gone, replaced by someone who saw me as nothing more than a source of money to be exploited. "The Derek I raised would never have done this to me," I said quietly. "The man who put me here isn't my son anymore. He made his choice when he decided to steal my life. Now I'm making mine." Janet smiled grimly. "Then it's time to spring our trap. Harold, prepare the financial documentation for the district attorney. Dr. Walsh, get the psychological evaluation ready for family court. I'll handle the emergency motions to revoke the power of attorney and freeze the accounts." "What about Derek and Amber?" I asked. "They're supposed to leave for Europe next week." "Oh, they're going to have a very different kind of European experience than they planned," Harold said with satisfaction. "It's hard to enjoy Swiss ski resorts when you're facing felony charges for elder abuse." "One more thing," Janet added. "We should let Derek know what's coming. Not the details, but just enough to make him panic and potentially make mistakes." "How do we do that?" I asked. Janet's smile was positively predatory. "We send him a message. Something that will let him know his mother isn't the helpless victim he thought she was." As I prepared to enter the final phase of our war against Derek, I felt a mixture of anticipation and sadness. I was about to destroy my own son, but he had destroyed me first. The only difference was that I was fighting back. The message I sent to Derek was elegantly simple. "You should call your bank. Today, love, Mom." I pressed send on Janet's smartphone Thursday morning at exactly 9 a.m., knowing Derek would be in his office preparing for his European departure the following Tuesday. Janet had insisted we use her phone so the message couldn't be traced directly back to me, maintaining the illusion that I was still the helpless, isolated woman Derek believed he'd successfully warehoused. "Now we wait for the panic," Harold said with grim satisfaction as he reviewed the legal documents spread across our library table. "By the time Derek figures out what's happening, it'll be too late for him to cover his tracks." Our timing was surgical. While Derek was receiving my cryptic message, Janet was filing emergency motions with the family court to revoke his power of attorney and place my accounts under temporary judicial supervision. Harold was submitting financial fraud reports to both the bank's security department and the district attorney's office. Dr. Walsh was forwarding her psychological assessment and Dr. Hendrick's cognitive evaluation to the Adult Protective Services Division. The first domino fell within an hour. Derek's frantic call came at 10:15 a.m. "Mom?" His voice was tight with barely controlled panic. "What did you mean about calling the bank? Is everything all right?" I had rehearsed this conversation with Janet, keeping my tone confused and slightly worried. "Oh, Derek, I'm so glad you called. There was a nice man here from the bank yesterday asking questions about some large withdrawals from my accounts. I told him you were handling everything, but he seemed concerned." "What kind of questions?" Derek's voice had risen half an octave. "I don't really understand financial things, you know that. But he mentioned something about transfers that didn't match the documented care expenses. I'm sure it's just a misunderstanding, but I thought you should know." The silence on Derek's end stretched for nearly 30 seconds. When he spoke again, his voice had changed completely, the loving son facade replaced by cold calculation. "Mom, has anyone been talking to you about your accounts? Any other residents or staff members asking questions about your finances?" "I don't think so," I said, maintaining my confused elderly woman act. Should I not have talked to the bank man? He seemed very official. No, you did the right thing calling me, Derek said quickly. Listen, I need to come see you today. There might be some complications with the European job. I'll explain everything when I get there. After he hung up, I looked at my allies gathered around our makeshift war room. Hook, line, and sinker, I said. Janet nodded approvingly. Perfect performance. Now he thinks the bank discovered his theft independently and that you're still his confused, compliant mother. He has no idea we've been building a case against him for 2 weeks. What happens next? I asked. Harold checked his watch. Right about now, Derek is calling his bank in a panic, demanding to speak with someone about his mother's accounts. He's going to discover that all transfers have been frozen, pending an investigation into potential elder abuse. And when he tries to access your accounts to move more money or cover his tracks, Dr. Walsh added, he'll find that his power of attorney has been suspended by court order. That's when he'll really start to panic, Janet said with satisfaction. He'll realize that his authority over you isn't as absolute as he thought. The second phase of Derek's panic played out exactly as we had predicted. My phone rang again at 2:30 p.m., Derek's voice now openly hostile. Mom, I need you to listen to me very carefully. Someone has filed false reports about me with the bank and the courts. They're claiming I've misused your money, which is absolutely ridiculous. Everything I've done has been for your care and protection. I don't understand, I said, letting genuine confusion creep into my voice. Are you in some kind of trouble? I'm not in trouble, but you might be. Someone is trying to manipulate you, probably someone at that facility. They want to get control of your money for themselves. You need to be very careful about who you trust. The irony was so thick I almost laughed. Derek, who had systematically stolen my independence and $200,000, was warning me about people trying to manipulate me. What should I do? I asked meekly. I'm coming to get you tomorrow morning. We're going to straighten this out with the bank and make sure no one can take advantage of you. Pack your things. You might need to stay with Amber and me for a few days while we sort this mess out. After Derek hung up, Janet immediately began making calls. He's planning to remove you from here tomorrow, she told Harold and Dr. Walsh. Probably trying to isolate you again so he can pressure you into signing new documents or giving him access to the accounts. Can he do that? I asked, feeling a familiar chill of fear. Not anymore, Harold said firmly. The court order suspending his power of attorney also requires judicial approval for any changes to your living situation. If he tries to move you without permission, he'll be in contempt of court. Dr. Walsh was already pulling out her phone. I'm calling Dr. Hendricks. We need him here tomorrow morning to provide an independent assessment if Derek tries to claim you're being manipulated or that your mental state has deteriorated. That evening, our resistance network expanded to include Rebecca Torres, who had become increasingly uncomfortable with Derek's behavior since my admission to Sunset Manor. I've been reviewing your son's paperwork, she told me during a private meeting in her office. There are several irregularities in how your placement was handled. The medical evaluation he provided doesn't meet our usual standards, and the financial arrangements seem unusual. Unusual how? Janet asked. Rebecca pulled out a thick file. Derek prepaid for 6 months of care, which isn't uncommon. But then he requested detailed invoices for services that haven't been provided yet. When I asked why, he said he needed them for insurance reimbursement. But Mrs. Hartwell's insurance doesn't cover assisted living. Harold leaned forward intently. He was creating false documentation to justify his theft. Those fake invoices would show that he was spending your money on your care when he was actually funding his European vacation. There's more, Rebecca continued. Derek also asked about our policies for residents with dementia or severe cognitive decline. He wanted to know how we handle situations where family members need to place someone in locked memory care. The chill that ran down my spine was ice cold. He was planning to have me moved to a locked unit? It appears so. If anyone questioned his financial management, he could claim your mental state had deteriorated and that you needed more restrictive care. In a locked memory care unit, you'd have no access to phones, no visitors without his approval, and no ability to advocate for yourself. Dr. Walsh made a note in her file. Classic pattern of escalating control. When the initial manipulation stops working, abusers often try to completely isolate their victims. But he won't get that chance, Janet said firmly. Tomorrow morning, when Derek arrives expecting to find a confused old woman he can manipulate, he's going to discover that his mother has allies, evidence, and a very clear understanding of exactly what he's done. Friday morning, I woke before dawn and dressed carefully in my best outfit, a navy blue suit that Thomas had always said made me look dignified and formidable. I wanted Derek to see immediately that something had changed. At 8 a.m., our war room was fully assembled. Janet sat at the main table with legal documents spread before her. Harold had his laptop open to bank records and financial evidence. Dr. Walsh had her psychological evaluation and Dr. Hendrick's cognitive assessment ready. Rebecca Torres had Derek's fraudulent paperwork organized by date and offense. Dr. Hendricks himself had arrived at 7:30, a distinguished man in his 60s who radiated the kind of professional authority that would be impossible for Derek to dismiss or intimidate. Mrs. Hartwell, Dr. Hendricks said as we waited for Derek's arrival, I want you to know that your cognitive test results were among the highest I've seen for someone your age. Whatever your son has been telling people about your mental state, it's completely without medical foundation. At exactly 9 a.m., Derek strode into the Sunset Manor lobby like a man preparing for battle. He was dressed in his most expensive suit, carrying his briefcase, and wearing the kind of confident expression that had intimidated me for months. But when Rebecca Torres led him to the library where we were waiting, the confidence evaporated from his face like morning fog. What's going on here?" Derek asked, looking from me to the assembled group of professionals surrounding our evidence-covered table. I stood up slowly, feeling the weight of 2 months of manipulation and betrayal in my bones, but also feeling stronger than I had since Thomas died. "Hello, Derek," I said calmly. "We need to talk." Derek's eyes darted around the library, taking in the assembled group with growing alarm. His gaze lingered on Dr. Hendricks, whose professional bearing and expensive suit marked him as someone with serious credentials, then moved to the stacks of documents covering our table. "Mom, what's all this?" Derek asked, his voice carefully controlled, but I could hear the underlying panic. "Who are these people, and why are you meeting with them?" I remained standing, drawing strength from my allies around me. "Derek, I'd like you to meet some friends of mine. This is Dr. Michael Hendricks, Chief of Geriatric Psychiatry at University Medical Center. Janet Woolsey, retired paralegal and residence advocate. Harold Brennan, financial crimes consultant. And you already know Rebecca Torres." Each introduction hit Derek like a physical blow. His confident businessman facade was cracking, revealing the desperate man underneath. "I don't understand what's happening here," Derek said, trying to regain control of the situation. "Mom, you called me about some bank issue. Let's discuss this privately." "Actually, Derek," Janet interjected smoothly, "your mother asked us to be here. She wanted witnesses for this conversation." Dr. Hendricks stepped forward, his professional authority filling the room. "Mr. Hartwell, I've conducted a comprehensive cognitive assessment of your mother. Her test results show no signs of dementia, cognitive decline, or diminished capacity. In fact, her mental acuity is well above average for her age group." Derek's face flushed red. "That's impossible." Dr. Patterson clearly documented her deteriorating condition. The confusion, the memory problems, the unsafe living conditions. "Dr. Patterson never actually examined your mother for cognitive issues," Dr. Hendricks replied calmly. "His evaluation was based entirely on your secondhand reports." What you described as confusion and memory problems appear to have been normal grief responses and minor oversights that occur in any household. Harold opened his laptop and turned the screen toward Derek. While we're discussing documentation, perhaps you can explain these financial transactions? $215,000 transferred from your mother's accounts to your personal checking account in the past month. Derek's eyes widened as he saw the bank records displayed on the screen. Those transfers were for Mom's care. Sunset Manor is expensive, and I wanted to ensure adequate funds were available. Sunset Manor costs $4,000 per month, Rebecca Torres said quietly. Even with additional medical services, your mother's care would cost less than $50,000 per year. Can you explain why you needed 4 times that amount? There were other expenses, Derek said weakly. Home maintenance, medical bills, legal fees. Janet pulled out a thick folder. We've reviewed all of your mother's expenses. There are no outstanding medical bills, the house was paid off years ago, and the only recent legal fees were for the power of attorney documents you pressured her to sign. I watched my son, the boy I'd raised, the man I'd been proud of, struggle to maintain his lies as they collapsed around him. But I felt no sympathy, only a cold determination to see justice done. Derek, I said quietly, we know about the fake invoices you requested from Rebecca. We know about the loans you took against my house. We know about the credit cards you opened in my name. We know about your plan to have me move to a locked memory care unit if anyone questioned your activities. Derek's mouth opened and closed, like a fish gasping for air. The careful manipulation, the months of planning, the systematic theft, it was all laid bare before him. You don't understand, Derek said desperately, turning to address the group. My mother has been declining for months. She's been confused, forgetting things, making poor decisions. I was trying to protect her. Dr. Hendricks pulled out his evaluation report. Mr. Hartwell, I've been assessing elderly patients for 25 years. Your mother shows no signs of the conditions you've described. Her memory is sharp, her reasoning is sound, and her judgment is excellent. If anything, she's demonstrated remarkable resilience in the face of systematic psychological manipulation. Psychological manipulation? Derek's voice rose. I've been taking care of her. I've been trying to keep her safe. Dr. Walsh spoke for the first time, her voice carrying the authority of decades in clinical practice. Mr. Hartwell, what you've described as care is actually a textbook case of financial elder abuse combined with psychological manipulation. You systematically undermined your mother's confidence, isolated her from support systems, and used her grief and vulnerability to gain control over her life and assets. Derek spun to face me, his mask completely dropped now, revealing the cold stranger he'd become. Mom, these people are lying to you. They're trying to turn you against your own family. They probably want to get control of your money for themselves. The accusation might have worked months ago, when Derek had me doubting my own perceptions. But now, surrounded by allies and armed with evidence, I saw his desperation clearly. Derek, I said calmly, these people have asked me for nothing except the chance to help me reclaim my independence. You, on the other hand, have stolen over $200,000 from me, forged medical documents, and placed me in an institution against my will. Harold cleared his throat. Speaking of which, Mr. Hartwell, you should know that criminal charges are being filed this afternoon. Financial elder abuse, identity theft, fraudulent documentation, and conspiracy to commit fraud. The district attorney's office considers this a particularly egregious case. Derek went pale. Criminal charges? You're pressing criminal charges against your own son? You stopped being my son the moment you decided to steal my life, I replied. The boy I raised would never have done what you've done. Janet opened another folder. The court has also issued an emergency injunction freezing all accounts you've accessed using the power of attorney. Additionally, your authority to make decisions on your mother's behalf has been revoked, effective immediately. This is insane, Derek said, his voice cracking. Mom, you can't possibly want to live alone at your age. You need supervision, medical care, safety monitoring. What if you fall again? What if you have a medical emergency? Rebecca Torres stepped forward. Mr. Hartwell, your mother is welcome to remain here at Sunset Manor if she chooses, but on her own terms. She's also free to return to her home or make any other living arrangement she prefers. The choice is entirely hers. Dr. Hendricks nodded. I've arranged for regular check-ins with Mrs. Hartwell to monitor her continued cognitive health. If genuine issues arise in the future, there are proper protocols for addressing them that don't involve family members taking unilateral control. Derek looked around the room wildly, realizing that every avenue of control he'd constructed was being systematically dismantled. Amber and I are supposed to leave for Europe on Tuesday. This job opportunity, it's the chance of a lifetime. Then you'd better call your lawyer, Janet said matter-of-factly, because you're going to need legal representation when the police arrive. Harold glanced at his watch. Actually, they should be here any moment. We wanted to give you the opportunity to hear the charges in your mother's presence, so you'd understand exactly what you've done to her. As if summoned by Harold's words, Detective Raymond Martinez and Officer Sarah Kim entered the library, their uniforms and badges immediately shifting the atmosphere from confrontational to official. Derek Hartwell? Detective Martinez asked, consulting his notebook. Derek nodded numbly. You're under arrest for financial elder abuse, identity theft, and conspiracy to commit fraud. You have the right to remain silent. As the detective read Derek his rights, I watched my son's face cycle through disbelief, anger, and finally, a kind of shocked recognition of what he'd brought upon himself. When the handcuffs clicked around his wrists, he looked at me with something that might have been remorse. Mom, I'm sorry, he whispered. I never meant for it to go this far. I studied his face, looking for any trace of the child I'd loved so fiercely. Derek, if you'd ever asked me for help, I would have given you anything. But you didn't want help. You wanted control. You wanted to take everything I had while convincing yourself you were doing me a favor. As the officers led Derek away, he turned back one last time. What about Amber? What about our life together? I imagine Amber will need to make her own choices about her future, I replied, just like I'm finally free to make mine. After Derek disappeared through the lobby doors, the library fell silent, except for the sound of Janet collecting documents and Harold closing his laptop. Well, Dr. Walsh said finally, that went about as expected. He never once admitted wrongdoing, never showed genuine remorse. Just continued trying to manipulate the situation, even while being arrested. I sank into my chair, feeling suddenly exhausted but also lighter than I had in months. Is it really over? The legal proceedings are just beginning, Janet warned. Derek will probably try to make a deal, maybe claim he was acting in your best interests. But with this much evidence, he's looking at serious prison time. Harold nodded. The financial restitution alone will take months to sort out. But the good news is that most of your money can be recovered and your house will remain yours. Dr. Hendricks gathered his papers. Mrs. Hartwell, you've shown remarkable courage throughout this ordeal. Your son underestimated your strength and your intelligence. That was his downfall. As my allies began to disperse, I remained in the library, processing what had just happened. I had confronted my own son, watched him be arrested, and chosen justice over family loyalty. It should have felt terrible, but instead, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: freedom. For the first time since Thomas died, I was truly in control of my own life again. 6 months later, I stood in my kitchen on Maple Ridge Drive, making coffee in the same ceramic pot Thomas and I had used for 30 years. The morning sun streamed through the windows I'd cleaned myself just days before, casting familiar shadows across the worn wooden table where Derek had once sat as a child, struggling with homework I'd helped him complete. The house felt different now, not just because I'd reclaimed it, but because I had reclaimed myself in the process. The woman who lived here now was not the same grieving widow Derek had manipulated so easily. I was stronger, more aware, more connected to the world around me than I'd been since Thomas died. The legal proceedings had taken 4 months to resolve completely. Derek eventually pleaded guilty to financial elder abuse and identity theft, accepting a sentence of 18 months in prison and full financial restitution in exchange for avoiding trial. His lawyer had tried to argue for rehabilitation and community service, painting Derek as a misguided son who had acted out of genuine concern for my welfare. Judge Patricia Morrison wasn't buying it. "Mr. Hartwell," she had said during sentencing, "your actions represent a profound betrayal of trust and a systematic campaign to rob your mother of her dignity, independence, and financial security. The court finds no evidence that you were motivated by anything other than greed and convenience." Derek had turned to look at me during sentencing, his face a mixture of shame and resentment. I met his gaze steadily, feeling neither triumph nor regret. He had made his choices, and now he was living with the consequences. Amber, faced with the collapse of her European dreams and the reality of being married to a convicted felon, had filed for divorce before Derek was even sentenced. She'd tried to contact me once, claiming she'd been manipulated by Derek and hadn't understood the full scope of his crimes. I'd listened politely, then told her that anyone who could spend months planning my imprisonment while smiling to my face wasn't someone I cared to maintain a relationship with. The financial recovery had been surprisingly straightforward, thanks to Harold's meticulous documentation and the bank's cooperation. Most of my stolen money was returned, the fraudulent loans were canceled, and the house remained mine free and clear. Derek's European adventure had cost him everything, while restoring to me what I'd thought was lost forever. But the most important recovery had been personal rather than financial. "Good morning, sunshine," Janet called from my back door, letting herself in with the key I'd given her months ago. She'd become my closest friend and confidant, the sister I'd never had. "Ready for our adventure today?" Janet had decided to leave Sunset Manor 2 months after Derek's arrest, realizing that she'd only been living there because her manipulative nephew had convinced her she needed supervised care. Like me, she discovered that fighting back against family predators had given her a sense of purpose and strength she hadn't felt in years. "I've been ready since dawn," I replied, pouring her a cup of coffee. "Harold called earlier to confirm the time. He's picking us up at 10. Today was special. We were driving to the state capitol to testify before a legislative committee, considering new protections for elderly people facing financial abuse. Our case had attracted attention from elder rights advocates, and lawmakers wanted to hear directly from people who had successfully fought back against family exploitation. "Dr. Walsh is meeting us there," Janet continued, settling into her favorite chair at my kitchen table. "She's been working with the Attorney General's office to develop training materials for medical professionals to recognize signs of elder manipulation. Our resistance network had evolved into something larger and more important than any of us had initially imagined." Harold now consulted with law enforcement agencies on financial elder abuse cases. Dr. Walsh had written a handbook for identifying psychological manipulation of elderly patients. Janet had become a legal advocate for seniors fighting unscrupulous family members. And I had become something I'd never expected, a public speaker, sharing my story with other elderly people who found themselves isolated and vulnerable after losing a spouse. "You know," I said, sitting down across from Janet, "sometimes I wonder if Derek did me a favor without meaning to." Janet raised an eyebrow. "That's a generous interpretation of attempted grand theft and imprisonment." "I don't mean what he did was right," I clarified. "But fighting back against him taught me things about myself I never knew. Before all this happened, I thought my life was basically over. I was just existing, going through the motions of living while waiting to join Thomas. And now? Now I feel more alive than I have in years. I have purpose again, friendships, ways to help other people." Derek tried to end my story, but instead he forced me to write a new chapter. The doorbell rang, and I looked out to see Harold's familiar sedan in my driveway. At 78, he remained sharp and energetic, his retirement enlivened by his work exposing financial predators who targeted the elderly. "Ladies, your chariot awaits," Harold announced as I opened the door. He was dressed in his best suit for our legislative testimony, every inch the distinguished financial expert who had helped save my life. As we drove toward the Capitol, I reflected on how much had changed since that terrible morning when I'd awakened in Derek's carefully constructed trap. The relationship with my surviving family had been complicated to navigate. Lily had eventually understood what Derek had done, though it took months of explanation and evidence before she fully grasped the scope of his betrayal. "I can't believe Derek did this to you," she'd said during one of our long phone conversations. "I mean, I knew he could be cold and calculating, but stealing from his own mother and trying to have you declared incompetent? It's like he became a completely different person." "Maybe he was always this person," I'd replied. "Maybe I just didn't want to see it." My grandchildren from Derek, Liam and Cassidy, had been devastated by their father's crimes and imprisonment. I'd maintained contact with them, making it clear that I didn't hold Derek's actions against them, but the relationship was inevitably strained. They were old enough to understand what their father had done, but young enough to still need him in their lives. "Grandma Catherine," Liam had asked during one difficult phone call, "do you hate Dad for what he did?" "I don't hate him," I'd answered honestly. "But I don't trust him, and I don't think I ever will again. He made choices that hurt me deeply, and choices have consequences." Lily's daughter Ella, now 11, had become my greatest source of joy. She spent 2 weeks with me every summer, and her presence filled my house with the kind of laughter and energy that had been missing since Derek and Cassidy were children. Unlike her cousins, Ella was too young to fully understand the family drama, seeing only that Grandma Catherine lived in a beautiful house with a wonderful garden and told the best stories. At the state capitol, our testimony was part of a larger hearing on elder abuse prevention. I spoke for 20 minutes about Derek's manipulation tactics, the legal vulnerabilities that had enabled his theft, and the importance of supporting elderly people who found the courage to fight back against family exploitation. "The most important thing to understand," I told the committee, "is that elder abuse often comes from the people we trust most. We teach children about stranger danger, but we don't prepare elderly people for the possibility that their own adult children might become their greatest threat." Several lawmakers asked pointed questions about the legal system's response to my case, and I was pleased to see genuine interest in strengthening protections for vulnerable seniors. After the hearing, as we drove home through the countryside, Janet asked me a question that had been on my mind as well. "Catherine, do you ever regret fighting back? Part of me wonders if it might have been easier to just accept what Derek was doing and live quietly at Sunset Manor." I considered her question seriously. The legal battle had been exhausting, emotionally draining, and had cost me my relationship with one of my children. There had been moments when I'd wondered if the price of justice was too high. "No," I said finally, "I don't regret it. If I'd accepted Derek's theft and manipulation, I would have spent the rest of my life knowing I'd given up without a fight. I would have died feeling like a victim rather than a survivor. Besides," Harold added from the driver's seat, "look what you've accomplished. How many other elderly people have you helped by sharing your story? How many families have avoided similar situations because of the legislation you've supported?" As we pulled into my driveway that evening, I felt the deep satisfaction that comes from a day well spent. My house welcomed me home with familiar smells and comfortable shadows, but it no longer felt like a museum of past happiness. It felt like the foundation for whatever adventures awaited me. I was 72 years old, a widow, a mother of 2, a grandmother of 3, and a survivor of financial elder abuse. But more than any of those labels, I was a woman who had refused to go quietly into that good night. I had fought back against betrayal and won not just my independence, but my sense of purpose. Derek had tried to write the ending to my story, assuming I would accept whatever fate he chose for me. Instead, I had taken back the pen and written my own conclusion, one filled with friendship, advocacy, and the hard-won wisdom that comes from refusing to be anyone's victim. As Thomas used to say, true strength isn't in never falling, but in always rising. I had fallen further than I'd ever imagined possible. but I had risen stronger than ever before. And I wasn't done rising yet. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.